to RegTech Live with Clause Match. Today, I'm joined by Malcolm Wright, where we'll be discussing how compliance can enable the future of crypto. Malcolm, thank you for taking the time to speak. Would you mind introducing yourself and a bit about your business, Diginex?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Freddie. My name is Malcolm Wright. I'm Chief Compliance Officer at a company called Diginex. We're based in Hong Kong. And we're a blockchain financial services company. So we have a number of different offerings. The first being a virtual currency exchange called Equos. Second, we have a custody firm called DigiVault, which is based in the UK. And then we also have some capital markets and asset management services as well. I have a second hat. I also advisory council chair to Global Digital Finance, which is an industry-led body that looks to advance the standards of the cryptocurrency industry.
Great, thank you, Malcolm. So the crypto space or digital asset space has definitely been transformed in recent years, going from what can be described as maybe more of an underground industry to what is now, I guess, a space invested by some of the largest institutions. So, I mean, off the top of my mind, Wells Fargo, Facebook, and Google. And with that, how has the compliance landscape changed for crypto firms over the past year?
It's been a busy time, let me put it that way. So the evolution of the industry and the transformation in the last 12 months has been astounding. This has been driven largely by a new set of guidance from the international body that oversees anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing controls called the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF or FATF. So the FATF released some recommendations. These were released last June, and they imposed upon countries to introduce regulations on how crypto firms could do business or should do business. So they, in terms of doing KYC and knowing your customer, in terms of monitoring the transactions, all of those kind of good things that make up a compliance program. So several countries have already implemented these controls and or these regulations, and now firms are starting to follow through with compliance programs that fit those regulations. Second to this, in Europe particularly, we've had the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, and within that came into force effectively from 10th of January. So there was a rush around Europe on the 10th of January where a lot of regulators started to bring in regulation for crypto firms. And in the UK, again on the 10th of January, under the FCA, crypto firms were required to formally register with the FCA. All of this has actually brought around a huge amount of collaboration in what is actually a very, very competitive industry. So it's great to see how we've all started to come together and point in the same direction to what good compliance should look like.
Great. And so I guess looking forward, now that a lot of these new regulatory initiatives have been released, what does it look like for the next 12 months for crypto firms, and what do they have to expect in terms of compliance?
I think it's actually going to look busier. So the last 12 months was really understanding the landscape, understanding what regulation is going to look like, understanding what compliance looks like. And so I can see that in the next 12 months, we're going to have to collaborate even further on how do we solve the problems of compliance together. At the same time, governments and regulators are also starting to ramp up, bringing in legislation around AML. And this in turn is sort of driving a whole new wave of how do we actually work together between public and private partnership around understanding each other's landscape. So the industry understanding what the compliance requirements are, but also regulators understanding what it looks like for the industry as well. So now it's more about how do we collaborate more? How do we start to really build out effective compliance programs? So that's everything from the tone from the top. The CEO is saying compliance is important, it matters, because we are a regulated, or we want to be a regulated firm, through to ensuring that every single member of staff is trained in anti-money laundering and other compliance matters. I think the other side of this, for some people who might be listening, is there will be a new requirement around compliance staff. So there's going to be a need for people that can do KYC, that can be doing transaction monitoring, that can do blockchain analytics. This is a great new area to get into in terms of investigative compliance around money laundering, and super, super interesting. These kinds of things, we're starting to see that there's much more tech-driven compliance that is required, where you have compliance officers that will understand technology, will understand the legal frameworks that they have to abide to, and also the sort of compliance overlay of that about how you actually start to bring these things together. And all of this then wraps up into, you're going to have to get licensed as a crypto firm. And that means, okay, if I need to be licensed, what are those things that I have to consider? So I have to consider everything from my internal messaging to my technology to my security to my money laundering controls and the systems and tools I use around that. And then how do I build out, effective policies, procedures, and everything that makes for a strong compliance program that I can put into my license application and take back to my regulators to really say, this is how I'm going to comply with the regulations, both here where I'm based, but also the other locations where I'm actually servicing customers, because the businesses will tend to be not just domestic, but actually work on a global and international scale.
So that's really interesting. And, my final question is going to be around technology. Before I jump into that, you mentioned obviously there's compliance meeting technology. Currently, do you think there is a skill gap in that area? And if so, I guess what needs to be done?
I really do. I think, and actually what was really interesting is I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we had about 3,000 compliance officers on the call, and we ran a poll and we said, are you thinking of upskilling, or are you thinking of staying the same in the next 12-month period? And 95% came back and said, we're upskilling. So there is definitely a move and definitely an appetite to an understanding that actually the landscape is changing. So I think there is a need to understand the fintech landscape, and it's an exciting place to be, because it's not just, I'm going to do this one part of compliance. It might be, well, I look at KYC, I look at AML, I look at investigations, I look at getting involved in user design around how you do onboarding. It may be any matter of different factors that you could be pulled into rather than a single view. So you don't have to be a technologist, but understanding that technology landscape, I think, is important.
Brilliant, thank you. So taking all of these challenges that we've spoken about so far, how can technology and maybe more specifically RegTech help?
I think RegTech holds a lot of keys for this. So the first one is really, it can be a cost-effective, cost-efficient means to ensure compliance. So rather than build out a rules-based transaction monitoring system, you might build one that uses artificial intelligence or machine learning, that if it can be proven to work, can reduce your false positives. And obviously false positives means less staff that you actually need to do those particular tasks. And you can employ people to actually look at the investigative side of it instead. So it has that side to it. The other part is better outcomes. So if you have more effective screening, then it allows you to ensure that you have better quality clients, and you're able to ensure that when your regulator asks you, you've actually stopped, you haven't onboarded the types of clients you don't want, or you've appropriately risk assessed your other clients based on any information you might find. And then there's things like, okay, I'm building out my license application, as I mentioned earlier. All of that has to be demonstrable. And when you're out just demonstrating it to a regulator, you kind of want to say, well, even things as simple as policies and procedures. If you're a company, particularly in COVID times where everybody's working from home, you want everybody to have consistent, same version, maybe even a test to it, that they've read it, and those kinds of things. And everything looks and feels the same, and it has that brand of compliance really matters to us. We've paid attention to it. So tools, where you can do policy management and that kind of thing, really sort of, I think actually a sort of invaluable thing to have.
Great. I mean, this conversation has been incredibly interesting. I think what we've, and you've highlighted, is that the crypto space is still in the grand scheme of things, in its infancy of maturity, and with that become, regulatory compliance challenges. However, what is very exciting, and we've talked about near the end of this conversation, is the opportunity, and with that is using technology. And the adoption of technology is going to be a lot easier. There's not the legacy systems or processes in the way to, create barriers for that adoption. So I'm really excited to see how, this space evolves. And thank you again for sharing your insights.
You're welcome, Roddy. Thanks ever so much.
Cheers, Malcolm. Bye.